Power rarely loses authority all at once. More often, it loses the ability to hear clearly long before it loses the ability to command. Orders continue moving through institutions. Reports continue arriving at ministries. Officials continue speaking with confidence about stability, loyalty, and control. But the information reaching authority slowly changes shape. Warnings become softened before they are repeated upward. Failures are delayed inside paperwork. Hesitation begins disguising itself as discipline. Systems built to preserve order begin preserving reassurance instead. What disappears first is not obedience, it is accuracy. And because authority still functions externally, the distortion remains difficult to detect from within. Decisions continue to appear rational because they are made inside an environment increasingly organized around protecting legitimacy from contradiction. The pressure does not emerge from open rebellion. It emerges from the narrowing distance between reality and what authority is still willing to receive. By the late 17th century, the Qing court governed one of the largest territorial administrations in the world. Authority extended through provincial officials, examination systems, military governors, tax registries, memorial networks, and bureaucratic reporting structures designed to transmit information from distant regions toward the imperial center. The Qing Emperor had stabilized rule after prolonged conflict, and the court increasingly viewed administrative order as evidence that the empire's governing structure remained responsive and secure. Provincial officials were evaluated through performance, reliability, and the preservation of local stability. Reports moved upward through formal channels where disorder carried political consequences, not only for populations, but for the officials responsible for describing it. Floods, grain shortages, local unrest, and tax failures therefore entered a reporting structure where acknowledgement itself could become dangerous. The court still possessed immense authority. Its institutions remained functional. Military power remained intact. Yet pressure accumulated within the distance, separating imperial expectation from provincial reality. At first, the distortion appeared manageable because the administrative structure continued producing the appearance of coordination. Provincial governors adjusted language before forwarding reports to Beijing. Local failures were described as temporary disruptions rather than structural problems. Grain shortages became irregular harvest fluctuations. Tax resistance became administrative delay. Officials understood that visible instability reflected not only on local conditions, but on their own competence and loyalty. The system did not require explicit deception to narrow perception. It only required incentives that made reassurance safer than contradiction. The court responded through familiar procedures. Additional reviews were requested. Inspectors were dispatched. Memorials circulated between ministries. But each layer introduced further delay because information now moved through officials increasingly aware that acknowledgement of instability could damage careers or invite suspicion. Authority remained active. Response mechanisms still operated. Yet the speed of correction began slowing beneath the appearance of administrative continuity. Regional clerks postponed revising tax records, while merchants delayed shipments, waiting for clarification that never fully arrived. The pressure intensified because the empire's scale required trust in intermediaries the center could not directly observe. The emperor depended on provincial interpretation to understand conditions across distant territories. But local officials increasingly learned that preserving confidence inside the system mattered as much as reporting accurately within it. Reports became calibrated toward acceptable concern. Enough disorder had to be acknowledged to justify action, but not enough to imply administrative weakness. This created a narrowing informational corridor where authority received conditions already shaped by institutional self-protection before decisions could even begin. Inside the court, This distortion remained difficult to identify because obedience still largely existed. Taxes continued arriving from many provinces. Bureaucratic rituals continued functioning. Examinations continued producing officials loyal to imperial order. Stability, therefore, appeared measurable through administrative continuity itself. The absence of visible breakdown became interpreted as evidence that pressures remained containable. Authority was not blind. It was delayed by the structure through which visibility operated. As military expenditures increased along frontier regions, provincial authorities became even more cautious about transmitting uncertainty upward. Resource demands intensified administrative pressure. At the exact moment, accurate reporting became politically riskier. Governors feared appearing incapable of maintaining order during periods requiring heightened imperial confidence. The result was not silence, but filtration. Each report removed friction before reaching the center. Contradictions became softened into procedural language. Failures appeared isolated rather than cumulative. At several provincial offices, lower administrators continued enforcing outdated quotas because revised instructions had not yet been confirmed through official channels. The distortion deepened further because the emperor still believed responsiveness remained possible. Additional inquiries were interpreted as evidence of vigilance rather than symptoms of informational erosion. The court expanded mechanisms intended to improve oversight. More memorial reviews were conducted. Trusted officials were rotated between provinces. Yet each new supervisory layer increased the administrative burden surrounding communication. Local authorities learned to manage scrutiny rather than eliminate distortion. The goal became demonstrating control under observation. Within this environment, hesitation acquired political value. Delayed acknowledgement preserved flexibility. Immediate admission of disorder risked irreversible attention from the center. Officials therefore postponed confirming problems until evidence became undeniable. But by the time instability could no longer be softened administratively, conditions often required larger responses than earlier intervention would have demanded. Authority did not stop acting. It reacted inside narrowing timelines created by its own reporting culture. The court still interpreted many disruptions as local administrative weaknesses rather than symptoms of systemic informational strain. That distinction mattered because it preserved belief in the broader structure. Problems could be corrected if individual officials failed, but recognizing that the reporting system itself incentivized distortion would have forced authority to question the mechanisms sustaining imperial legitimacy. The empire therefore continued adjusting personnel more easily than adjusting perception. Military officers waited for authorization that remained under review while provincial administrators avoided issuing contradictory directives before imperial confirmation arrived. The pressure became increasingly visible during moments requiring rapid coordination across regions. Delays that once appeared procedural began shaping outcomes directly. Grain transport slowed, while provincial authorities debated responsibility for shortages already visible locally. Requests for exemptions moved through multiple administrative levels before receiving acknowledgement. Officials continued protecting the appearance of orderly governance because visible disorder threatened confidence in imperial competence itself. Authority remained operational, but the process through which it understood conditions now consumed increasing amounts of the time required to respond to them. Inside the court, confidence narrowed rather than disappeared. The emperor still possessed armies, officials, tax systems, and institutional legitimacy. Yet the environment surrounding decision-making had become increasingly insulated from contradiction. Warnings arriving too directly risked appearing disloyal. Local caution accumulated upward until uncertainty itself became administratively difficult to express. Even accurate reports required careful framing because excessive alarm carried political implications beyond the information being transmitted. This created a final strain inside authority itself. The court still believed correction remained achievable through stronger supervision, more disciplined administration, and firmer enforcement. Recovery appeared possible because the institutional structure still stood intact. But the information required for adaptation increasingly arrived after conditions had already hardened. Decisions therefore became narrower, not because authority lacked power, but because it received reality through layers organized around preserving confidence within the system. And so the empire continued functioning. Orders continued moving outward from the center. Memorials continued moving inward from the provinces. Officials continued measuring stability through procedures still visibly intact. Yet within that continued motion, hesitation expanded quietly through the administrative structure itself. Authority remained capable of commanding obedience. What it struggled to preserve was unfiltered recognition. The court still believed responsiveness could restore clarity because the institutions surrounding imperial power had not collapsed. They remained active, disciplined, and operational. But somewhere between distant provinces and the imperial center, information had begun adapting to authority before authority could adapt to events. The system still moved. That was the pressure. Subscribe to Timeless Questions for more thoughtful journeys into the ideas and forces that shape civilizations and continue to shape us.